your dog used to come when you called. It respected the boundary at the kitchen doorway. It didn't test the leash, didn't challenge your space at meals, didn't revisit rules it seemed to have accepted months ago. Then something in your life changed. Your schedule, your stress level, your routine. And almost immediately, your dog started behaving differently. Commands it obeyed reliably are now being ignored. Rooms it never entered have become contested. Lines it never crossed are being tested, one by one. You changed. Your dog noticed, and it will not simply take your word for what comes next. This is not regression. It's not disobedience. Your dog is running a behavioral audit on you, and understanding exactly what that means changes everything about how you should respond. Most owners experiencing this reach the same conclusion. The dog has become defiant, dominant, deliberately difficult, and from that diagnosis comes a predictable response: more discipline, elevated frustration, erratic enforcement of the very rules the dog is probing. Here's the problem. That diagnosis is wrong, and the interventions it produces are precisely the inputs that make the situation worse. Punishment, emotional escalation, and inconsistent rule enforcement don't communicate authority to a dog in this state. They confirm what the dog's brain is already suspecting, that its model of you is broken, and the investigation needs to continue. The correction deepens the problem it was designed to solve. Dogs do not process their social world the way we tend to assume. They don't operate on abstract concepts like loyalty or respect. What they operate on is prediction. Behavioral scientists refer to this as a social prediction model, a continuously updated internal representation of each significant individual in a dog's environment, built from thousands of micro-observations about behavioral consistency, emotional pattern, and response reliability. Not thinking, pattern recognition. Research from Eötvös University in Budapest demonstrates that dogs track owner behavioral consistency with measurable precision, using it to calibrate their response confidence and their level of social trust. When owner behavior deviates significantly from the established pattern, the dog's brain registers what amounts to a model invalidation event, and the automatic response is a systematic behavioral probe sequence designed to reestablish predictive accuracy. This is not defiance. It is applied social science executed instinctively. The probe sequence is structured and sequential, not random. It moves through 4 distinct phases, each designed to collect a specific category of information. Phase 1 is boundary softening. Minor rule violations the dog hasn't attempted in months. Entering a restricted room. Positioning itself closer to food than it ever would have before. Ignoring a recall command once, then watching your reaction. Phase 2 is consistency verification. The dog repeats the same violation across different contexts to determine whether the rule change is universal or situational, whether this is a new pattern or a one-time lapse. Phase 3 is emotional reactivity probing, with behavior specifically calibrated to produce an owner emotional response because the dog is testing whether your emotional regulation has changed alongside your behavioral patterns. Phase 4, if the previous phases have produced inconsistent data, is escalation toward direct social challenges. Canine social cognition research, including work by Brian Hare at Duke's Canine Cognition Center, documents precisely this capacity for behavioral inference. The dog is not acting out, it is collecting data. Every test is a data point, not an act of rebellion. There is a moment in this sequence that owners almost universally miss, and it is the most important one. The first test. It is always the smallest, most easily dismissed probe. A glance held a beat too long, a foot over a boundary it used to respect without a second thought, one recall ignored. Owners who recognize and respond to the Phase 1 test with calm, consistent behavioral confirmation can reset the dog's model efficiently. The full sequence never escalates. The investigation closes. Owners who dismiss, or respond inconsistently to the first signal communicate something unintentional but precise. Further data collection is required. The full testing sequence is not inevitable. It is what happens when the first signal goes unread. The behavioral difference between a dog operating on a confirmed owner model and one operating on an invalidated model is precise and measurable. A dog with a stable model responds to known cues with high reliability. It settles quickly after a correction. Its behavioral baseline is consistent across contexts. A dog operating on an invalidated model shows variable response latency to commands it knows. It retests boundaries even after apparent compliance. It monitors its environment with elevated alertness. Its stress recovery time after disruption increases measurably. Research from the University of Lincoln's Canine Cognition Program documents this directly. Behavioral reliability in dogs correlates with owner behavioral predictability. Not training history, not breed temperament. The variable is the owner's consistency, not the dog's character. Here is the mechanism that makes this situation self-reinforcing, and it explains why so many owners find themselves stuck in it for weeks. Every time a boundary probe produces an inconsistent response, enforced one day, ignored the next, met with frustration the day after, the dog encounters a variable reinforcement schedule. Sometimes the test fails, sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes the response is emotional enough that it produces its own kind of reward, information, at minimum, novelty. Variable ratio reinforcement is the most resistant to extinction of any schedule in behavioral science. The dog has not learned that testing doesn't work. It has learned that testing produces unpredictable but occasionally successful outcomes. The inconsistency is the fuel. The dog isn't being stubborn. It is responding rationally to the environment you've created. The most damaging response pattern is the one most owners default to, matching the dog's testing behavior with intensified emotional reaction, raised voices, visible frustration, punishment applied inconsistently, with force calibrated to the owner's emotional state rather than the severity of the behavior. The assumption is that emotional intensity communicates seriousness, that escalation signals authority. Behavioral science documents the opposite. Emotional escalation from an owner during a model invalidation phase provides exactly the kind of high-intensity, unpredictable input that confirms the dog's emerging hypothesis that the owner behavioral model has fundamentally changed. The dog doesn't read emotional intensity as authority. It reads it as evidence that the previous model no longer applies and that the investigation must continue with greater urgency. The type of testing your dog runs is a diagnostic indicator of which dimension of its model of you has been invalidated. Schedule changes. New work hours, altered routines, tend to produce spatial and temporal boundary testing. The dog is probing whether the rules that govern those time windows still apply. Emotional state changes, sustained stress, depression, relationship disruption tend to produce social hierarchy and emotional reactivity probing. The dog is testing your emotional regulation ceiling because that ceiling was part of the original model. Rule inconsistency changes, enforcement relaxed during illness or distraction, produce compliance reliability testing across previously established commands. Research by Julianne Kaminsky on owner state tracking in companion dogs confirms that dogs adjust their behavioral strategies specifically in response to changes in owner attention and availability, not generically, but with precision targeted to the dimension that changed. This is not an abstract cognitive process. There is a physiology running underneath it, and it matters for how you interpret what you're seeing. Dogs operating in an owner model invalidation state show elevated norepinephrine, the neurochemical of alertness and unresolved uncertainty, along with sustained cortisol elevation and measurably increased heart rate variability disruption. Veterinary behavioral research documents that periods of owner behavioral inconsistency correlate with increased gastrointestinal disturbance, disrupted sleep in companion dogs, and heightened startle responses. The dog running a behavioral audit on you is not simply being difficult. Its nervous system is operating in a sustained uncertainty state with real physiological cost accumulating daily. The testing behavior is not the problem. It is the visible indicator of a problem that exists at the level of the body. The goal is not behavioral control. It is predictive legibility, becoming an owner whose behavioral pattern the dog's brain can model accurately enough that continued investigation becomes neurologically unnecessary. This happens in 3 phases. Phase 1 is anchor behavior identification. Isolate 3 to 5 high-frequency behavioral interactions, greeting protocols, feeding routines, command-response sequences, and execute them with deliberate, unwavering consistency, regardless of your emotional state or scheduled disruption. These become your model confirmation data points. The core pattern that tells the dog's brain the owner it knows is still present beneath whatever surface changes have occurred. Phase 2 is boundary response calibration. When testing behavior occurs, respond to every instance with identical, low arousal enforcement, not louder, not more forceful. identical. You are not communicating dominance. You are eliminating the variable reinforcement schedule that sustains the testing sequence by making boundary outcomes completely predictable. Phase 3 is transition signaling, when you are deliberately changing something, a new routine, a new rule, a new schedule. Introduce it with consistent environmental cues that communicate intentional change rather than unpredictable inconsistency. Give the dog's model updating system structured data to work with rather than ambiguity to probe. Your dog does not test you because it has lost respect for you. It tests you because it has lost certainty about you, and certainty is the currency its brain runs on. Every species that survives in close social proximity to others must be able to predict those others with accuracy. Your dog has built its entire behavioral world around an internal model of who you are, how you move through the day, how consistently you enforce the rules you set, and how predictably you respond when those rules are challenged. When that model breaks, it doesn't simply accept the confusion. It investigates, it probes, it tests, not to dominate, not to defy, because living with an unpredictable social partner is a survival problem that its nervous system is neurologically compelled to solve. The behavior you've been interpreting as disobedience is the most sophisticated thing your dog does. It is the same system that made it capable of living with you in the first place. Think back, what changed in your life right before your dog started acting differently? And what was the first boundary it tested? Leave it in the comments. The answer usually reveals exactly which part of its model broke first. And if you want to understand what happens when a dog concludes its owner is no longer a reliable social anchor at all, that's the next video, and it's a darker continuation of everything covered here.